In this session, we will talk more about the source of finance, how it is classified, how it is categorized, and then the medium term is all between 1 year to 5 years. Within that kind of a thing, we will actually go with ownership. It is classified into two terms. One is the owner's fund, another is the borrower's fund. Who is the owner of the enterprise? The equity shareholders are the owner of the enterprise. So internal means what? The sources where we can actually get internally within the business. Hello everybody, a warm welcome to one and all. I'm Vidhyaashram from the Department of Business Studies in Vidhyaashram PU College, the Temple of Excellence. Now in this session, we will talk more about the source of finance, how it is classified, how it is categorized. So here you will understand that it has been classified and categorized in three sections. Firstly, when you go with the source of finance, you will understand that it is divided into three groups. Okay, so on what basis it is divided? On the basis of period. That means here what happens is what exactly the tenure is, the time is, it whether it is a long term or medium term or a short term, it is divided in that kind of a phase. Next you have is the source of generation. Now how will you generate the finance? On the basis of how will you actually pull the capital or the investment. Then the last one is the ownership. You have what? The ownership. So according to these three, it has been classified. One is on the basis of period, second it is on the basis of generation, how will you actually generate the income, and then the last one is on the basis of ownership. When you understand these things, now ownership, I'll tell you here, it is divided into majorly many different concepts, but I'll tell you about the three concepts where the ownership lies upon in this session, and then we'll also understand what exactly the generation is all about, and lastly we have what? The period, that is, it is divided into three. In this session I'm going to tell you more about the period, we'll talk about it, as well as generation and the ownership. So what exactly the period is all about? Firstly, the period basis, right? Now I told you that in the period basis what really happens is you have three things. One is the A, B and C. A is the long term, that is through the long term process. Then you have something called medium term, and then you have something called the short term. So these are the three things which you are supposed to classify. On the basis of period, the different sources of fund can be categorized into three parts. One is long-term sources, medium-term sources, short-term sources. What is this long-term sources? Long-term sources, usually it is like more than 5 years whenever you go for the source of finance. If it is like more than 5 years to 10 years, 20, 30, it can go to 100 years, that we call it as long term. And then the medium term is all between 1 year to 5 years. Within that kind of a thing, we'll actually go with it. And short term is all about the time duration is very little, that is less than 1 year, we call that as short term. Now where the long term, actually the banks, they give loans, right? So it is all for long term, as well as the same bank will give it for the medium term as well as for the short term, that is working capital. Also there are banks who will actually provide you loan. Then you have so many other kind of examples wherein you can actually go with equity share, preference shares in the long term. There are so many people who invest on equity and preference share for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So they are categorized in the long term. There are few people who invest within 1 year to 4 years or 5 years. They go with a medium term. There are again people who do intraday. They actually play within a day itself. Actually, they invest and then they take it. So it is categorized into three. One is long term. That means it is more than 5 years. It is more than 5 years. That is called the long term. When it comes to the medium term, it is more than 1 year to 5 years. And when it comes to the short term, it is less than 1 year. It is what? Less than 1 year. So this is what the basis is. So let's check the one more is on the basis of ownership. On the basis of ownership, how it is classified. On the basis of ownership, the sources can be classified into owner's fund. What is it? Owner's fund and borrowed fund. Please understand, on the basis of ownership, it is classified into two terms. One is the owner's fund, another is the borrower's fund. Now, when I say owner's fund, it is all about the equity share and the preference share. It comes in the owner's fund. When it comes to the borrower fund, that means you're borrowing. That means the company is borrowing from somebody. We call that as debenture. Now, people who actually give loan to the company, all those people will actually come in the borrowed fund. But what is the guarantee here? What exactly the privileges here? The privileges, whether the company makes profit or it makes losses, they are liable. They are liable, or they have an obligation over the borrowed fund. That means the debenture holders should be paid the interest. Now, this is what the reality is. When it comes to the owner fund, that is the equity, what happens is equity holder has, I have already told you that he is the owner of a company. When he is an owner of the company, if he makes profit, that is the company makes profit, he gets his share. If the company make losses, then he will also lose it, because as the owner he need to bear the losses. So that is what the owner's fund is and the borrowed fund is. Owner fund means fund that are provided by the owner of an enterprise. Owner, who is the owner of the enterprise? The equity shareholders are the owner of the enterprise. So people who have equity share, they are called as the owners, which may be sole trader. See, even a sole trader can be a owner, right? Then you have partnership or shareholder of the company. Who is it? Shareholder of the company. And that to what type of share of a company? That to a equity shareholder. It is what? Equity shareholder. So this is what on the basis of ownership we classify. So the next one is the sources of generation basis. So we have broadly three categories. One is on the basis of period, another is on the basis of ownership, and the last one is on the basis of generation. When we go with a generation, in the sense we generate the basis of sources of finance, we have internal as well as external. So in internal means what? The sources where we can actually get internally within the business, and externally is outside the business. So outside the business, how is that we can actually make? Internally, how we can make it? Now, internally, issue equity shares, give preference shares, you give debentures. So all these things are internal. Now, external, in the sense the financial institutions are there. You just borrow from the financial institution, use the other policies where you can actually take loan from the banks, loan from people who can actually give money to your investments, the public deposit. So all these things are the internal as well as the external sources example. So another basis of categories, the sources of fund can be whether the funds are generated from within the organization or from external sources. So you can also think like this. You have like bank, right? Now bank is the external source. Financial institutions, they are the external sources of income you can actually go with. But what exactly happens here is, whether you make profit or losses in your company, you are supposed to give them the interest amount. Whereas in the internal source, what happens is within the organization, like retained earning, you have one example is retained earning. So what is retained earning? Retained earning in the sense, when you make profit, you will not distribute all the profit to your shareholders. You will actually have something in your account, that is, you have reserves and surplus, you have retained those earnings. Now, why will you retain those earnings? Because next year we don't know whether we're gonna make profit or loss. To have that kind of a safety, right? So we'll have something called retained earning. In the next session, I'm gonna talk about retained earning. What are the merits of retained earning? What are the demerits of retained earning? See, only one demerit of retained earning is, As a shareholder, it is my right to actually get all the profit. But what happens is, because of uncertainty and risk in the next year, the company will retain some of their profit. So example, 1 lakh is what, I'm just giving you a random figure. 1 lakh is what the profit was, and there are say 10 shareholders. So 10 shareholders, you are supposed to actually divide them equally, and that is what the profit you are supposed to give. But what you people or the company does is, the company will retain at least 30,000 rupees, and in that 70,000 they will distribute it to 10 equity shareholders. Now what has happened? Try to understand. 1 lakh rupees, if it is divided into 10 people, how much it would be? Now 70,000 divided to 10 people, how much it will be? So it is a demerit not for the company, it is a demerit for the person who has invested on the share. That is, their profit will be actually divided, and it is not so good for the shareholders, is what the shareholders always go with. So here is internal source, in the sense of fund are those that are generated from within the business. So what is external source? You can actually go with it. External source of funds are those that are generated outside the business. That is called external. So I have given you here internal. You can also go with the external. What exactly the external is also about. So it's a quick recall what exactly we decided. We have discussed that there are three bases. That is, one is the period, that is here long term you have, medium term and short term. Then we went with the basis of ownership. In the ownership, we got to know that there are two terms. One is the owner's fund, another is borrower's fund. Now owner's fund, in the sense the people who actually have that shares, and the borrowers means we have taken loan from them. And the last one is the generation basis, sources of generation basis. We got to know there are two things. One is internal as well as external. So internal means within the business, if you generate it, it is called internal. External means outside the business, when you generate money or generate finance, that is called external. So thank you so much. If you have any doubt regarding this chapter, this session, you can easily contact us. We are always there to help you. Thank you so much. I'll see you when I see you.